You're listening to Lemon's Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality.
On stage left is childhood influences and some classics, and then on the other side is more fantasy, and that whole side's fantasy. And then I actually have a bunch of DVDs on the bottom because we have limited shelf space.
Same.
So,
I've got VHSs down here on the bottom of mine.
yeah,
It's like a bunch of Disney VHS tapes.
Yeah, my friends give me a hard time. They're like, "Dude, you know streaming exists?" And I'm like, "I don't know. There's something nice about putting the DVD in the player."
Yeah, and you can't get. I don't think you can get the Lord of the Rings special edition or limited, whatever it is, because my son
the
has
extended
it. I
cut.
don't think you can get that on a streaming. I think they just do the regular old.
Yeah, you have to purchase it, but the regular editions are the ones that just turn up on the service.
Yeah.
And me being a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, I've purchased all 6 versions.
I cannot watch the normal cuts anymore. After I watched the extended cuts, I was like, this adds so much to the story. Like it was, I couldn't go back.
Yeah, but they run really long though, so like sometimes like I alternate which ones I watch year over year. So I watch the whole trilogy every year, usually in the fall, and then I'll flip like whether I do the extended or the theatrical cut.
Yeah, we have to do it like in chunks. It's like, okay, we're gonna commit like 3 hours or 2 hours, and then take a break, and then commit.
Yeah, but you have littles.
Yeah.
So us people with no littles, we can just sit there for freaking hours and hours and just I told Josh, my son, that we're going to have like a Lord of the Rings marathon at Christmas this year. So
that's a commitment right there. I break them up. So I try to find 3 weekends where I have like a Friday or Saturday night free. And then I split them up because I'm passing out halfway through the second movie if I go back to back. So
is Tolkien a big inspiration for you on like your fantasy writing? Because I know you do like grimdark and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I have not actually read Tolkien. But it's funny because I browsed through like the wiki and stuff like that. So I'm familiar with a lot of the background lore, but I haven't actually like read the books, even though I own them.
I have to say I'm the same way. I've got all the Hobbit series right there and the Lord of the Rings series, and I have not started them yet.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely an influence because it was still the first major like fantasy like movie that I saw. I was 9 years old when Fellowship came out, and it completely blew my mind. And of course that and some of the video games I was playing at the time, like Baldur's Gate, which is like the whole Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons universe, is like very Tolkienian. It's modeled off the same like dwarves and elves and trolls and orcs and all those archetypes. And so that stuff was that's what like fantasy was to me for like the longest time until I realized that there's other stuff outside of that. So it's a huge influence.
So you played Baldur's Gate, the first one?
Yes.
Have you tried BG3?
No. I'm not letting myself play it until I finish drafting the sequel to the book I just released.
Is that like a reward for you?
Yeah, I have an addictive personality. So like if I play a game, I'll play like one video game every 2 years because I go all in.
You got to collect all. You got to get it to the 100%.
Yes, yeah, I'm a completionist. Like Elden Ring, like ruined my life for like 4 months.
My husband is the same way. I'm like, I'm there for the story, and he's like, you missed half of the game. I was like, I completed it. It says I'm done.
Yeah, I was in front of that game for like hours every day. My wife was like, "Can we go outside?" I'm like, after this boss, maybe." So I know myself, and I have to set like hard limits with that stuff.
That's awesome though, and I love that you've created a system of like reward for yourself too. Welcome to Lemon's Listening Library. I'm your host, Randy Lemons, fantasy author, or RL Rose to those of you in the community, a romance community. Today I am joined with my amazing co-host, Kathy. Kathy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Kathy Ireland. I am primarily an audiobook listener, so I know my audiobooks pretty well. I also, in my day job, I do accounts receivable for a large manufacturing company, and I also, along with the podcast, I also do audiobook production for an author for her audiobooks.
Awesome. And if you guys are interested in joining our Patreon to have your services announced on the show as an advertisement or your books or anything like that, head over to our Patreon, check it out, and it's a great way to support the show as well. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm super excited about this guest because I think they are our first fantasy author on the show. So, yay, because samesies. All right, Cal, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes. Hi. My name's Cal Logan. I write fantasy, primarily epic fantasy that slants a little grimdark. I've been writing seriously for about 8 years after doing it for fun throughout, basically my entire early life. Outside of that, I'm a personal trainer and a competitive powerlifter, and I have a really loud dachshund that you will definitely hear barking at some point during the podcast.
Rizzo, right?
Yes.
That's cute.
Yeah.
I've almost had a dachshund before.
They're great. My wife has had dachshunds like her whole life growing up, and so when we decided to get a dog, she was adamant that we get one, and I was a little hesitant, and then she's like, do some research on the breed, and so I did, and I was like, oh, like they're a hunting dog, that's cool, like they go into tunnels and they like hunt badgers, and I thought we were gonna get this like fierce little like hunter work dog thing, and no, he's just like a goofy little noodle. Yeah.
Do you want the long hair dachshund or the short hair?
Yeah, he's a long hair.
Oh,
super cute.
Yeah. He's well behaved for the most part. He's just really sweet dog. So it's I didn't get what I was expecting, but it was like 10 times better than what I was expecting, if that makes sense.
That's like the dads who want a son and they get a daughter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you're gonna be happy no matter what.
Yeah, that's cute. So you do the training and the physical side of things as well. I know that we talked a little bit earlier about your addictive personality. Does that have a play in like, okay, fitness is something I'm hooked on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I started working out when I was 14 because I joined the wrestling team on a dare. I wasn't even 5 feet tall yet, so I was like 4'10", 4'11", and I was 90 pounds. And so this kid in one of my classes, he was a junior, I was a freshman. He's like, there's no way you'd make it through a season of wrestling. I was like, yes, I will. So I joined, and I walked into the room, and the coach looks me up and down. He goes, "We got to put you in the weight room, kid." And so I started doing it, and I liked it right away. It just felt good to work towards something and to have something structured that I could like put my energy into. And that, and I wrestled, and I just never really looked back. And that obviously then got me into studying exercise science and exercise physiology in graduate school, and put me on the career path I'm on. And that's when I got into like strength sports and powerlifting after doing some mixed martial arts between high school wrestling and strength sports. So I've just always, had both feet in that realm.
That is something I found mixed martial arts and jujitsu. Those were things that I found were absolutely insane if you have an overactive mind on going in there and that's all you can think about is like what's in front of you. Everything else just goes out the window. You have to focus 100% on what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it's funny because like combat sports and strength sports, they kind of have like a meathead reputation, but they're weirdly like intellectual. So it is something that like takes a lot of focus and kind of like mental discipline to pursue.
Yeah,
Oh,
well, and if you're competing, then there's a lot of science actually that goes into, what you eat, when you eat it, when do you bulk, when do you, cut. I mean, like it's a it's a very in-depth process, and you have to know. Do you track like all of your blood work and stuff too as you go to make sure that all that's.
I don't track the blood work. Like I'll do like checkups and stuff, obviously, to make sure I'm staying healthy. And then so what I compete in primarily, I've done pretty much every strength sport at least once, but my main focus is powerlifting. Probably done about 9 or 10 competitions, and that's so. For those who don't know what powerlifting is, it's max squat, max bench press, and max deadlift. You get 3 attempts at each lift. You do 1 rep, and your heaviest successful attempts of each lift are added together. That's your total, and the highest total in your weight class wins. So it's a strength contest, but there are weight classes. So I have cut weight and gained weight, on purpose to fit into a certain weight class. So that's where the nutrition plays a huge aspect. But then it's performance based; it's not aesthetics based. So sometimes it's like, all right, I just have to gain 10 pounds in 2 months, or lose 10 pounds in 2 months while keeping strength. But it is yeah, but you have to stay very on track with your nutrition, just in the interest of continuing to get stronger and having a better performance.
So did you, and this is something that I've found with, the physical side of things, you do have to pay attention to your mental health, I feel like, when you are going in that realm. And there is an aspect of learning how to fortify your mental health because of the stuff you put yourself through, like what you put your body through. It's like, this is not necessarily natural. And so did you dive at all into like the mental side of things as well?
It's a good question. Uh, I tend to, I think just because of the way like I'm wired, I do go all in with stuff, and especially when I'm competing, I kind of get to the point where like I don't care how I feel, which is maybe not the most like necessarily healthy thing, but when you're trying to like surpass certain limits and just put yourself through that much stress, like you kind of have to just be okay with not being okay for a while. Um, like the last month before competition, I basically everything hurts. I'm sore. I'm tired. You just feel kind of like a low fuse. Just like neurologically, you just feel kind of burnt out. That makes me sometimes not too fun to be around. But my wife knows how it goes, and she's super supportive. And then afterwards, it's like, all right, let's go on some dates. Let's live life again.
Yeah,
So
you make up for it.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of part of the territory. And then I do take breaks from competing if I feel like I'm not in a good place to start. But once I start prep, it's basically I'm hitched to the wagon until the wheels come off, and it's it's worked it's worked so far.
Yeah. So do you train people in that specifically, like to do powerlifting, or do you just work with them as fitness in general?
If they want to compete, I will. So I've put I think 3 clients through powerlifting meets. One of them competes every year. He's 67. He got into it when he was 62. And it's funny because he's like a mild mannered lawyer. He comes in with like suit and tie, and his hair all combed, and then like he's an absolute savage. And so he's what I would consider probably my most dedicated like powerlifting client. But most of my clients, they're just regular folks who just want to lose 10, 20 pounds or get a little stronger, or maybe like their knee or their hip hurts and they just want to like move around and feel better. So that's most people, and that's my my client base.
Are most of your clients in person or virtual?
They're all in person. When COVID hit the industry, I had to do a little bit of virtual training. Um, so I worked for a small business for a while, and that eventually pivoted to the owners of the building bought out the business owner and basically made like an amenity space, but they kept the staff. So the business model switched. But this COVID hit when it was still a small business, and we had to do virtual training just to help it stay afloat. And I was actually managing the personal training department at the time, so a lot of it fell on my shoulders. And I hated virtual training because like I like to be in the room with the person. I like to like we do a lot of heavy lifting with like barbells and dumbbells and kettlebells and stuff. And virtual training like in someone's living room, it was like a resistance band and a yoga mat if you're lucky. So it was just different. It would really put me out of my element, and it's just harder to kind of really like be there and be like fully present for that training session and connect with that person, because you have this barrier in front of you. And usually personal training is very hands-on and very involved.
That's awesome. So your fight scenes when you write stories are just epic, right?
They seem to be the highlight from what reviewers are saying.
Yeah. I imagine the knowledge on how you move your body because you actually do it really transfers over well.
100%. Uh, it's yeah, and so it's funny because I really like writing fight scenes and they come really naturally to me, but they're also really difficult to write because I go into in the same way that like if you have really good world building, you might only show 20% of what you know like on the page. I think like the fight scenes are the same way. Um, and I try to highlight the most intense bits, and that's why it flows and feels so chaotic and fast paced. But I like basically choreograph the whole thing from start to finish, like on the back end, and then just pull out the pieces of it that I think are important for the reader to know, or the things that are like what would the character actually be processing, because you're not going to see like if you've done jujitsu, like you get thrown, or somehow you're like, oh, how did my arm end up over there? Like now I'm getting arm barred. And so there's like sometimes things just happen and you're not aware of it. And so trying to keep that sense of chaos while still keeping the reader anchored in like what the character is experiencing and what they do have a grasp on. I don't know, that might have like rambled a little bit, but
No, I love that, because like especially when you're doing jujitsu, like if you get caught in a choke that starts cutting off your circulation, you fade very quickly. So it makes sense to where like, oh hey, now this character's blacking out and they wake up and they don't know what happened.
yeah, exactly. Or like your sensory perception just like shifts like really can shift really abruptly.
Yeah.
And then like one trick that I try to do is I will sometimes, if I want to show kind of what's happening on a broader sense, I will essentially have the character like take a break in that they're put in some situation where they actually do have a moment to like clean the blood off their sword or like straighten their helmet that got like dislodged or something. And that's when they're processing the environment of what's happening around them. So the character who's involved in the fight is taken out of it for a split second. And that kind of like sets the grounding of the larger context of like, this is where they are in the middle of this bigger conflict. And then I go back to their, and then they go back in, and then it's more like singular and focused of what's right in front of them. So that's one of the ways I kind of, keep it intensely focused on one character while still keeping the reader anchored in the scene as a whole as it progresses.
So did you study like how to do that kind of stuff, or was that just something you kind of developed by, what you read and you enjoyed, or just developed it by doing it?
I definitely did a lot of like formal, like I remember Googling like how to write fight scenes along with dialogue and character development and like literally every other thing about writing that I could when I was starting off. And then I watch a fair amount of movie and TV analysis as well, because I think it's really useful to understand storytelling. And I think if you understand storytelling through different mediums, it still rounds you out as a whole. So even though not all the practices translate well to writing, the principles still do hold up. And so I'm going back to Lord of the Rings. Helm's Deep is like unanimously or known as like one of the greatest fight scenes of all time. And the reason is because you're consistently shown the scale of the battle, but then the characters and their role in tipping the scales of the battle. And there's this beautiful back and forth where there's small victories, small defeats that gradually get larger and larger until the like all hope is lost moment, and then Gandalf rides in. But the way that they keep you anchored around Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, while still showing the larger movements of the siege when certain bridges are being taken, it's completely brilliant. And that's kind of what clued me into like, how would I do this in written form? Because I can't just show it, right? Like it doesn't appear on screen the way that it would in a movie, but there's still a way to, and it's like, okay, to show it to the eyes of the character. Okay, like when would a character reasonably be able to assess the entire battlefield? Like, well, they probably need to take a breath. Like, okay, where are some natural lapses in this battle where I can have the character do that? And that's kind of what developed or led to me developing that technique.
I think that too, just as in the Helm's Deep battle, like you're exactly right. He pulls it back to where they take that breath, but they also have the banter, the lighthearted banter, between Legolas and Gimli. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like you're going to put, get you a box to stand on, like little things like that kind of lighten the mood a little bit, and also just remind them that you're still. Yes, you're battling this huge evil, but your personal relationship with this person, even as a brother in arms or whatever, is still vitally important.
Yeah, that's the humor in that siege and throughout that whole trilogy really lands. It's few and far between, but it's like a nice breath of fresh air. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I remember like 2 already, Legolas, and he's like, I'm on 17.
Yes.
What?
Yeah, I was. 11-year-old me was like on the floor laughing at that.
Oh yeah.
And then like 2 minutes later, I'm like scared again and like, oh my God, they're gonna die. That's one thing that I struggle with is I don't think there's a single funny moment in any of my battle scenes, because and again, like I tend pretty grimdark, and but the irony is like one of the hallmarks of grimdark is kind of this like dark humor that's very like cynical and witty. Like Joe Abercrombie pulls this off to a T. And my stuff does not have that nearly as much as like a lot of grimdark does. I think there's a few moments of levity, but it's very sparse, and it's pretty much never in the heat of battle. It's kind of like in the quieter moments when like there'll be like a little bit of banter between two characters who are kind of like testing each other's like limits a little bit, like teasing each other. but it's pretty limited. So tonally, it's, what I write is it's pretty grim.
And you kind of explained it a little bit, but can you explain to our listeners what grimdark is and what they would expect with reading something in that genre?
Yeah, so it's a subgenre of fantasy that basically the hero is not guaranteed to win. It's powered by like morally gray characters who are usually acting in their own interests. The ones who are doing good things might be motivated for selfish reasons, even though they're doing something that is, a good thing. It tends to be dystopian and very violent. The violence itself is not the only thing that, like, something can be very violent without being grimdark. But most grimdark tends to be violent, and then tonally, it's bleak and there's no guarantee of a happy ending, basically. And kind of like I just mentioned, there tends to be a underlying cynicism or dark humor that kind of lends itself to that bleaker outlook.
So when you're writing this, I mean, I do you experience these emotions along with your characters while you're writing this? Because gosh, at the end of writing something, do you need like something just completely goofy or, lighthearted to kind of bring you out of that realm
Oh
of
yeah,
just dark?
yeah. So I've like teared up like writing stuff, like some like heavy moments for my characters. So I really try to like put myself in their shoes, and a lot of the stuff they deal with, like it's pretty raw at times. And then it's all like I'll come home on like a Friday night and I'll write for several hours, and then I'll be like done, and then I'll be done with that. I'll close the laptop and be like, yeah, I'm watching Step Brothers. Like I just need something to take me out of that mindset.
Put your balls on my drums. Yeah, that'll take you out real quick.
Yeah, exactly. Like that at that point, I just need to laugh and like decompress.
That's a good balance. Yeah. No, and that makes sense. Do you ever, like, in your mind, do you ever wish or let's see how to say this, your characters not necessarily having like their happy ending, do you kind of in your mind make up a happy story for them just because you're like, I wish that they could have that happy ending?
Like a headcanon alternate ending.
Yeah.
No, actually, I think a lot about how I want to end stuff, but once I'm on it, like I'm pretty firm with it. And that's, I think one of the reasons I really like Grimdark is because it's true to life in the aspect of like things don't always work out the way you expect or the way you want to, and that's just a fact of a fact of life, and I like mirroring that. I mean, I get like I'm pleased when I read a happy ending, so I enjoy it as a consumer, as a reader. Um, but when I'm making something, I don't know, I feel compelled to not always have that be the case and to let consequences play out naturally. So it's not like I'll never write a happy ending. It's not like a character that I write will never come out of a situation for the better, but it's not going to be a guarantee. And I might write a story or a series where pretty much everyone has a pretty bittersweet or terrible fate, and I might write one where most people come out ahead. It depends. But this trilogy that I'm starting with is definitely more in the grimdark camp. So it's just brace yourselves, I guess.
Yeah, the trigger warning is just get ready.
Yeah.
Have you experienced, because I can imagine that a lot of your characters go through obviously some pretty tough situations. Maybe they get injured badly and it takes them, puts them in a bad situation. It takes them a while to heal. Have you experienced that to be able to relate? Have you, because I know lifting weights and all that is easy to injure your shoulder or pull them out, whatever.
Yeah, I've been hurt real bad a few times. The worst one by far is so I competed in powerlifting nationals in 2020. Actually, yeah, it was September of 2020. I took third. It was a really good competition. And at the time, for my squat, I tried to squat 500 pounds on my third attempt, and I should have gotten it. I just made a mistake and I missed it. I was really bummed about that. So it's kind of like a chip on my shoulder. But other than that, I had a good competition, and still in total my best one to date. And then I came out of that, took like a month off, but I was really motivated and I started training like a fiend again because I was going to do it again next year. And then, had a really bad year. Later that year, lost my father-in-law to melanoma, and I was still like training through that. And it was just, I was like just stressed out and like not on board with my nutrition or my recovery or anything. I was training too hard, and I basically blew my back out a month later. And that injury took me, so that was November, it was Thanksgiving morning of 2021 actually. And that injury took me about 2 years to recover from, to the point where I could start training again. Because I would come back too soon, hurt it again. I'd miss or overlook some crucial part of the rehab. Basically, like the stuff that governs like how your leg rotates in the hip socket. A lot of that was extremely weak, and that caused my back to overcompensate, and it just like basically gave out. The good news is that last September I was finally in a place to start training to compete again, and I was like, if I don't get 500 pounds, like I'm going to smash my head into a wall, and I ended up getting it.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was a big, a big chip off my shoulder finally that I got that.
Where do you think that comes from? Like that just gritty determination of like, this is what I want and I'm going to achieve it. And I hope that your wife gave you a run for your money and that's how that relationship worked. And you're like, I want her, I'm going to achieve it.
Pretty much. We tell, as far as like me and her, like meeting, you're saying?
I'm just joking. I have no idea what your relationship is. I'm just like fantasizing.
There's a story there, so let's go with that.
Well, yeah, we can circle back to that. No, it's because we tell different stories. Like she makes it sound like I think she kind of chased me a bit, and she's like, no, you were chasing me, and I'm like, all right, well, however we got here, it's it's good, it works.
Yeah.
But as far as answering the original question, like where that determination comes from, I was raised in a pretty like, if you say you're going to do something, like see it through kind of household. And I think, so there's definitely that, like part of my upbringing. And I think part of it's just natural. And again, just kind of boiling back to that, like personality where if I set my sights on something, like I want it and I'm going to go after it. And it usually works out. Like I'd like to say I've achieved or, like hit every deadline I want to hit or achieved everything I've wanted to. Again, sometimes you come up short, right? Like the first time I missed 500 pounds, like there were a lot of times when I was like, maybe that was my one shot and I blew it, which ironically led to me being so pissed off that I ended up coming back for it.
I've noticed that, anger and frustration like that, it's not always a bad thing if you utilize it in a way that is motivational. Like it can be one of your best tools.
Yeah, 100%. It's fun. And one of my main characters, Jin, he's an extremely angry character, and a lot of his internal conflict is about managing that. And in his case, it's pretty destructive, especially at first. But it's something that I kind of resonate with, because there are times when you're just frustrated by your circumstances or the world, but just exactly like what you said, you can use that as a tool to improve your situation or improve something about yourself. So I think in that aspect, it can be misunderstood. Like it's just another emotion, just like happiness or sadness or joy or jealousy or anything else. And it's just about how how you let it affect you and what you decide to do with it.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And that's a good way to say it too, because it's not just anger. You're right. You can use any emotion to your advantage if you kind of know how to work it and use it against itself.
Yeah.
So when you first started writing, did you write grimdark or did you shift into grimdark or how did that happen?
So my first book, which is like my dumpster novel, it's never going to see the light of day. I wrote that when I was like 17, and I would just go to the library like during lunch and write, and that was 200,000 words of self-indulgent teenage drama nonsense.
Why are you not going to publish that?
Oh God, I'm cringing right now just thinking about it. But there's that running joke of like your first million words are probably not going to be good. So that took out about 20% of that, which is nice. So that was the first book I wrote. And even though I was like, I was in love with fantasy by that point. So I'm not sure why I decided to write whatever that was, but it was definitely not fantasy. And then I did a lot of like short stories and stuff in college. I think I started like maybe 2 projects, but I was honestly just too busy like partying and studying and just doing college stuff. So college was probably the period of my life where I wrote the least. And then I started when I was 25. I was like, all right, I'm gonna like seriously write. And then that was an epic fantasy novel. Definitely had some grimdark tendencies, but it was probably more in line with epic fantasy. A little less grim, even if it was still like gritty and grounded. A little less cynical, and there were some more good-hearted and like very altruistic characters to balance out the morally gray or the totally rotten ones.
So with your fantasy writing and your writing in general, did you write to kind of satisfy a sense of I want to read this story, or what made you actually start writing?
I think it's part of it. I don't know. I just had an idea, and I was like, I have to put this down. Like I just felt like I can't not do this. Um, it just the same way that like I just feel feel really drawn to something. It just like sits in you until like it makes you take action on it. And so I enjoy. It's funny like when I'm writing it, I'm like I kind of hate this because I'm reading it 100 times. But then I didn't look at Shadowbane for like a few months, and then I just like pulled up a proof copy, and I was like checking it to see if it's like good or like if the pages are properly formatted, and then I'm like I'm actually enjoying reading this right now. Like this is actually pretty solid. And so I kind of surprised myself there. So I guess, yeah, in a way I ended up writing the book I wanted to read, even though that wasn't my ultimate intention.
Is that what you read on your own personal? Do you read the grimdark?
Yes, absolutely. So, and I still need to go back and circle around to some classics like Glenn Cook. He's kind of considered like the father of grimdark. But what really got me into it was Luke Skull. So I'd grown up on Redwall, Harry Potter, Aragon, uh, Goosebumps. Not that's horror, not fantasy, but those are like the things I read as a kid, and I cleaned out most of those series. Um, and then I found the Drizzt Do'Urden, or like Legend of Drizzt books by R.A. Salvatore, and I basically read those every single one that he had published up to a certain point, alongside some of the companion series that around like the Drow elves and stuff like that, or some of the side characters. So I read all that stuff, and that's all very like classic high fantasy. And then I picked up this book from like Walmart or something. Like we were on vacation, and I was like, I need a book for the beach, and I picked it up. It was the second book in a trilogy. Because I didn't even think about that. The Sword of the North by Luke Skull, and I was like, oh my god! I was like, these characters are such jerks to each other. Like these people are awful. Like this is awesome, and they just felt so real and so relatable, and it was just cool seeing like a knight who was a coward, and I was like, I'd never seen that before, or a surly character who, despite being like an insufferable jackass, is like super loyal and stuff like that. So just seeing these like complex characters and their dynamic, and seeing people do things for their own reasons that was not just like we have to defeat the evil.
Yeah.
It just felt very refreshing at the time, and granted that this was like 10 years ago, right? So I know like grimdark has kind of had its day in the sun, and it's kind of given way to other subgenres like cozy fantasy or romantasy. But at the time, grimdark it felt very new to me. So I devoured that trilogy. And the other thing is the prose was very, it was kind of eye opening. It was so well written. Just like everything was just like sharp and cutting. The imagery was super vivid. Because a lot of fantasy is kind of more like flowing and I don't mean it's a bad way, but kind of flowery, right? Like there's a lot of like lush descriptions and things seem very grand. And this place just seemed like dirty and gross and like just a horrific, like horrible place to live. And I was like, this is it just felt very new, and I was immediately hooked. And I moved on from that to Joe Abercrombie, and he was one of those guys where like his work is so good. I'm like, it almost makes me want to give up because I'm like other stuff. I'm like, okay, like I can see myself getting there. I can, like this seems doable. It's like reading Joe Abercrombie. It's like watching the Olympic gymnasts. Like you're just like, how is this possible? He just blends so many like so many ways like nuances with his character development. He makes things feel like familiar and new at the same time. His prose is like rich and like descriptive, but like funny and vivid. It's such a blend of all these different elements that make his work like just a joy to read.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read that because the closest thing I can get to when I think about that is like, have you ever read Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series?
I have not. So he's one of like the juggernauts. I need to buckle down and just start tearing through his backlog.
Yeah, yeah. I just finished it, so it's like fresh in my mind, and some of the dirty, just hopeless feeling that you feel by the end of that book, I was just like, it's not a religious book, but there is a religion theme with like gods and stuff like that through the whole thing, and it's like I have a whole new perspective on religion because of this book, because it's just like you don't know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and it's just brilliantly written.
Isn't that cool when like you can like you're reading this like fictional made up thing and then it gives you like some newfound perspective on real life?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm
No, I that is my favorite. When it shifts my actual reality and I can expand it a little bit more and I'm like, this is I can apply this to my actual view of religion in general, and it's amazing.
yeah, yeah. When I come away with that, I'm like, this is sorcery. Like you like inceptioned some perspective in my mind, and now that's a part of my personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. Is that a hope that you have that someone's going to say that about your books one day?
Yeah, that's kind of like I feel like that feels kind of nuts to say out loud, but like, yeah, if I can distill some weird like revelation into someone's mind about something, or give someone a little clarity about something that they're facing or dealing with in their life, then that'd be really cool. That's like art that stays with you. If any of my work ended up being like that for someone, that'd be awesome.
Now, do you put any of your books in audio?
I want to. So I just released. So this is my debut novel, and I just released it on Tuesday. And I'm trying to figure out when is a good time to do the audiobook, in between or alongside the releases of the sequels. Which, as an audiobook producer, I'd actually be interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's two different camps, and a lot of it is cost prohibitive. So, um, in order to get the audiobook to release at the same time as your novel, it's you have to have forethought about everything 9 months in advance, because a lot of the narrators, depending on who you get, they're booked out 6 months at least. So you have to, kind of plan that in. But, like the one that I'm helping manage the production for, it's the book just released probably about a month ago. And, because of narrator schedules, the audio isn't going to release till, several months down the line. So it's.
Do you think, as far as you think that's a good strategy though, kind of staggering the releases in order to kind of keep a sustained like interest or like publication schedule?
Yep, I was just going to say that I think that that there is something for that, because it is almost like a second push, for your book, if you do the marketing correctly and really market the audiobook, and depending on the narrators that you get, they're gonna push it on their platforms. So yeah, I think it's a great way to get a second life to the book, for sure.
It's something I definitely want to do. And you did mention the financial aspect, and that's something that I knew I definitely could not release the audiobook alongside the printed copy. I hired a professional editor, I hired a great cover designer, and so I put some resources into this book, and I wanted to produce something that is indistinguishable from something that would come off like a big five, press. And I think I did that. But because of that, I knew I wouldn't be able to spring the money for audiobook yet. Between the length of Shadowbane, the paperback is 520 pages, and what I want to do audiobook wise. So Shadowbane is split between dual POV. It centers on two twins. I have not even actually said what the book's about. So there's two twins, Shura and Jin, who are mercenary demon hunters in a world that's modeled off of feudal Japan. So that's the premise, and so the chapters are written
Did you say future Japan?
Feudal, like late 1500s. If you've seen the TV show Shogun, it basically takes place right around that same time frame. So the Edo period was characterized by like strict isolationist policies, lots of economic prosperity, and a lot of peace and stability. But before that, there was a period called the Sengoku, or like Warring States period, and that was basically 200 years of like vicious civil war. So this takes place in a setting like that. It's its own original world because I wanted to play with the government structure. There's a few kings instead of a single emperor. So it's its own world, but it's heavily based off of Sengoku Japan. And so they're basically mercenaries for hire that are hunting demons that have started to plague the landscape. And so the story is told in an alternating POV, and I would love to have a male and female narrator to do the chapters, but then I'd also need someone who's comfortable. They don't have to be fluent in Japanese, but there's some Japanese terminology, and I put a lot of research into getting the language right. So I would like to have narrators who can like pronounce the words correctly, and just so it's like a seamless experience. And so I realized that's going to be that a high bill to foot. So
I might have a
I
female
was,
narrator that I could recommend to you later.
that would be excellent.
I love that
Uh,
you've put so much thought into like the way that you want it to be already, because I think that's a huge piece is thinking of it ahead of time and like having an idea of what you want and your expectations of it. Because a lot of authors are like, now what? I don't know what to do next, and you're already putting thought into that.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to be like pretty patient with stuff and try not to like fly off the handle with ideas, which is I'm super impulsive, and so like I usually shoot from the hip and like day to day decisions. But I'm like, this is, as much as it's art, it's business, and I was like, I need to be strategic with this, and like so I'll like write an idea down and just like marinate on it for like months, and if I'm still excited about it in a few months, that's when I'm like, okay, this is probably worth exploring, and that's both for like writing ideas, but also like how I like the cover idea for Shadowbane or something like that, or how or when I want to release stuff like that. Just try to be patient with myself.
Yeah,
I
that
think
impulsive
that
feeling, that's putting a lot of work on my shoulders in the past, where I like design a whole book cover and then the next day I'm like, I don't really like that. That's not fitting with me. So a good strategy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think
In
it's
in that
smart to
particular
come
case,
at it like a business. You know what I'm saying? Like I think it's smart to come at it with that mindset, not just the not just a creative free thinking, oh, I'm gonna just write this and then just spit it out there. Like I love that you have that very strategic plan of when do I release it? Do I release it on a Tuesday? Do I release it on a Friday? Like, what time of year do I want to release it? And when do I want to, like, I love that. I think that's super smart.
thank you. And who knows? Like it's not like I necessarily make the right call. Like my book, maybe Thursday's the best day for book releases and Tuesday's the worst. Like there's some stuff that I tried to look up that it was kind of like, just do it and see if it works for you. And the reason I did it Tuesday is because it's the one day where I don't work like 12 hours, so I had some time to sit on social media and just retweet stuff constantly. So I was kind of that was more of like boxed in by just my day to day circumstances. But then I figured, like I can, even if I think patiently on a decision and it ends up not working out for this book, at least I have the experience and I know like what not to do or what to try differently next time. Like I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself with this being my first release. Like I have high hopes, but I also need to temper that with like some reasonable expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean it's good having the dreams and the mindset of already like this is a learning experience. Failing is one of the best ways to learn how to succeed, and that's something that I think every author and every person who has a dream should consider is like it's not really failure if you're learning from it. It is literally just a stepping stone to getting you to where you want to be.
Absolutely. I forget where I heard this, and I think it was within the context of lifting weights or like competing. But it was basically, it was, if someone is better than you at something, it's only because they failed at it more than you have. And that was something that I heard, and I was like, "Yep, that's staying here. Like that's like a life changing piece of perspective." Um, and so that's something that I've grown pretty comfortable with. It's just like sometimes you swing and you miss. Like that's fine. Like no one just hits grand slams left and right. It might seem like they do, but that's because you didn't miss like the first 1,000 strikeouts when they were toiling in obscurity.
Yeah. And I like that better than the saying of like, it takes whatever, I think it's like 100,000 hours to be considered a master. I like what you said better because when you think it takes 100,000 hours or however much to be a master at something, you're just thinking of you're not really thinking of the failure or, you know, the successes. You're not really thinking about what's actually going into those hours that they're putting into it. Whereas what you're saying, it's like, yeah, they failed more than you. So it's already just like almost getting you excited to fail, which that's a great way to look at things too.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes pressure off you and you can be comfortable being like, I don't have to get this right the first time.
Yes.
Um, this is good. This ties in, I swear, but are either of you familiar with or fans of the band Soundgarden?
Yes.
Okay, so Chris Cornell is my favorite musician of all time, R.I.P. And I read his biography, and because like I was listening to Black Hole Sun when I was like 5 years old, because I had an older brother, he got me into it, and so like I love this guy's music, and I read his biography, and the band blew up in 1995, right? And that was like their super unknown album, and reading the biography, I was like, man, it's like they were playing for like 12 years before that, and so it goes like half the book is the part where they weren't even famous, and just seeing how hard this like legendary band and an artist, this like genius hardworking guy, even how hard he had to work to, you know, to break in. And it was weirdly comforting because it's like, you know, talent in whatever medium, whether it's music or writing or business or like or anything, you know, even like extreme talent needs time just to develop and marinate. And so it's like really comforting of like, okay, like my favorite musician, like the best guy, like I know who, in my opinion, who does this, still had to work on this for over a decade before he caught a break. So like, it's okay that I've been writing at the time for like 6 years and hadn't been published yet, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the saying, you know, a successful business takes 9 failed businesses, so start 10 businesses. It's kind of the same of like writing books. You know, if you want a successful books, you might as well just write 10 of them because you're going to get a successful one in there. Just like Kathy was saying, this is sort of like a business. Like it isn't sort of like a business. It is. If you want to do this on your own and be self-published and that sort of thing, if you can break into, and this kind of caveats right into the next topic I was wanting to talk about, if you can break into, you know, getting a small press or being published by a bigger house, that is,
You hear
yay,
that?
there's Rizzo.
Excuse me for 1 second.
You're
Hey,
good.
Rizzo, come here, buddy. Come here.
I like that it scared you too, though.
It's yeah, it's loud. It's very jarring. He has woken me up out of a dead sleep, and I've been like, oh my god, like we're under attack. It's like I think he wants to come up. Come here.
No, it's fine.
Oh yes, please.
We want
Alright.
to see. We want
Meet Rizzo.
Oh,
my
hi.
God.
Oh, you're
Hi,
so
puppy.
cute.
He is.
Yeah,
He's like,
he's not good with the eye
Dogs
contact.
are
He
always
doesn't.
welcome.
no.
What's that?
The dogs and puppies are always welcome.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear
Oh,
that.
kisses.
He's so his mom's at the gym right now. So I take Saturdays off, but she works out Saturday mornings. So he's feeling a little restless at the moment.
Yeah, he's like, thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
Before we get
To
into,
his
I'm going to ask
comfort.
you: does your wife, does she read also? And like, what does she read? Does she read a lot of your genre of books, or does she read like the hockey romance and all that?
That's a great question. So she's pretty broad in her genres. She reads both fiction and nonfiction, and she does read fantasy. So she's actually, I got her into Joe Abercrombie. She reads kind of like, what is it, like Woman in the Window, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Girl on the Train, Gone Girl. I think those are all on the bookshelves. So she likes to read some like suspense thrillers and stuff like that. She did read some Colleen Hoover. Was not for her. Her mom was like gushing about it, and she tried it out, and she's like, "That's okay, you can have this back." And then I don't think she does sci-fi, but then she'll do some contemporary stuff too. I want to say she did Bird Box. She does some Stephen King. Like she read It, even though she's terrified of clowns. So she's got some pretty eclectic tastes. And then people always ask me like if she reads my work. So we have an agreement. She doesn't read a word while it's in progress. And I think that's fair. Like she's my wife. Like she's not my editor. And there's plenty of other good places to get feedback. And she's like, I will read it at some point once it's totally published. I don't pressure her about it. I don't care if anyone I know personally reads my writing or doesn't. Like if my friend made like a chair, I wouldn't feel compelled to have his chairs in my house, right? Like it's like our friendship is separate of that, and like whether or not they like the thing that I create it doesn't have any bearing on it. Like if they genuinely enjoy and want to read it, that's great. But if not, I'm not going to feel slighted or insulted.
I think that comes back to the, treating it as a business that, within your marriage. I think that's super smart. You leave your work on the computer, and then like that's a separate. I think that's very difficult for husband and wives to work at the same business because you're always like you never get away from it.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, actually, she and I do work together, so we're both in the fitness industry.
Nice.
So at the facility we work at, she's the assistant general manager, and she basically runs the day to day, and then I'm the lead trainer. So so yeah, we already spend a lot of time together. I'm like, you don't need to be like nose deep in my writing. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a healthy way to do it. Me and my husband, I force him to read it. I'm like, okay, you ready in bed? I'm going to read to you this chapter I just wrote. And he's like, you misspelled that. And I was like, shit. So yeah, I think I could probably learn from you.
Yeah. Different people, different dynamic,
Oh yeah.
And the thing is, like, I'm mortified if people like read something that's not that I don't think is like ready yet. And I know like I'm never happy with like my first couple drafts. So, it's not something that I would like really want anyone to read anyways.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nope, it's for his eyes only. He can judge me all he wants to, but I'm with you. It is not something I want anyone else reading yet.
Yeah. Even like the first time I sent Shadowbane out to some beta readers, I was having like some massive anxiety, and then like within a week, like someone was like, they point out some flaws, of course, but they're like, overall, this is extremely solid. Like, here's what didn't work. So like that was like a huge relief where I was like, okay, like it was a little validating. It's like, okay, like maybe I'm on the right track here.
Did you do ARC?
Yeah,
readers?
and I
Did you send out to ARC readers?
Yes. So I did one round of betas, but they all pointed out the same things that didn't work, and I took a risk with like the pacing, and I was like, does this work? Does it not? And they're all like, nah, man, doesn't work. So I went back and fixed that, and then I think I did 2 more rounds of self edits and then a round of pro edits, and then I sent out to ARC readers. And by that point, like there were a handful of proofreading issues that a couple of them were kind enough to point out, and then reviews started coming in, and felt like I had a really good book under my belt.
That's a huge piece of it that I don't think a lot of people understand is the feedback that you get from actual readers, like the people who just write their book and then publish it and then people get eyes on it. Like you do, just like you said, kind of need the feedback of like, does this work? Is this hitting the way I want it to? And having those readers go through and read it and give you that feedback is a huge piece.
Yeah, 100%. I can't imagine having published Shadowbane just off the cuff. And you're just too close to it. Like when you're making the thing, like if you're making a cake, right? You taste it like 100 times, like you kind of forget, you lose your perspective, So it's nice to have someone with like a clean palate, so to speak, just go in and just read it totally blind and see what they come away with. One of the things I struggled with most is essentially like how much information to convey, because I know 20 times as much as I'm putting on the page, and so sometimes like I'll reference something, and in my head I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense, but I forget that the reader has none of the context that I have and has not been living with this thing in their head for 3 years, and they're like, this is really obscure, like I don't know what this means, or I'm not sure how this ties in. And so it's like, okay, I need to put more down on the page. Like I don't like beating readers over the head with stuff, but at first, especially, I give too little information. So that's like one of my default beta questions is like, where do you feel lost? And then whenever someone points that out, especially if it's multiple people pointing it out, I'm like, all right, like put more in here, more context.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question to have in there. I remember one scene in my book, I was watching my husband's reaction as he was reading through it. I just revealed like this piece of this character's background of why she's such a dick and everything. And I was like, he read it and he had like no emotion when he got to it. And I was like, did you not see how that like showed her background and stuff? And he's like, no, that what? And then I explained to him and he's like, I didn't get any of what you were trying to convey there. You need to give more detail. And I was like,
yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why like that's why it's so valuable, because you're getting a perspective, and sometimes like I think as soon as writers we forget, because we read and write, we forget how people's brains work if they're primarily readers. It is different, and so taking their feedback into account is crucial. Like they're ultimately the person who like you're writing the product for, right? And like not to speak of it as like this like commodity that is only made for like for that purpose, but like that's who you're trying to entertain. That's your audience. That's who you're trying to connect with. And so that's the feedback you should take into account while staying true to your vision for the story.
Yeah.
Have you done, excuse me, have you done, or are you planning on doing any book conventions and, book signings and things like that?
Yes, I definitely want to. I think I have like probably like a small local one or two that I'm going to apply to and just see how that goes. Figure out like, dip my toe in the pond first. That's one thing. Like I just need to do more research because I'm not sure exactly how it works, and I just don't want to stumble in like head first. So that's probably something that I'll do. If not this winter, then like in spring, and it's something I'd like to do for sure.
Yeah, I almost think my son reads a lot of fantasy and like dark. I mean, he plays Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, so that's
nice.
What he does. But he and his best friend went down to a Comic-Con down in a fantasy Comic-Con down in Miami, and it was I almost wonder if something like that would be more geared towards your target market of people than of course you can get other people at different book conventions, but I would think that something like that might be a little bit more towards your target market.
That's a really good idea. It's funny. I just made this joke with one of my clients. We were talking about it, and he asked something similar, like if I'm going to do a book fair, and he's like, dude, you should turn up in like cosplay or something as one of your characters. And I was like, my characters are Japanese, right? Like, I was like, dude, like if I show up in like full samurai armor, I was like, I'm either going to get canceled or I'm going to sell a million copies. Like I'm not willing to take that gamble.
But if you went to one of those Comic-Cons and you had, some cool little stickers and swags and, whatever to go along with your, the whole gist of your book. I mean, I think, of course, all the anime and all that stuff. I mean, all those people, they would eat that up.
Yeah.
That one's free, by the way. I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Thank you. I got two things here. I did not realize how much like book swag is a powerful like add-on. Like I completely overlooked that. And then I'm seeing all these releases with all like the PR boxes and the book boxes and stuff. And I'm like, man, like I totally missed the ball on that one. So that's something that like I'd like to incorporate in the future.
100%. And again, you're going to probably need to look at, your market. They're not going to want cutesy little stickers or, little cute little mugs or whatever, because that's the romance community. But, they would probably like, pens for one thing is always super popular. But, the plastic or, rubber wristbands was something cool on there. That's probably pretty
yeah. I was thinking
well in your genre.
Yeah, definitely. Or like I like one of the like impulse ideas, like something I wrote down and I'll look at it later is like a bookmark and like one side is Shora's character art and one side is Jin's, something like that.
100%.
And then I have this vague idea of like maybe it's shaped like a sword because Jin fights with a giant Buster sword or something. So like I don't know. It's just like it's a thought, and I'm like I'll put that down and I'll see if I come back 3 months later and I'm like that's stupid or not.
My husband actually does have a bookmark. It's a metal bookmark, and in it, the top of it is a sword, and it's pretty freaking cool. I might steal it eventually.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah.
He's like, I'm writing
it down.
There. Yeah. Did you see me looking around for a pen and paper?
I did. I was like, write it down.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, you're going to get a copy of this, and you can rewind.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, this is basically research at this point. This is awesome.
Yeah.
So with anime, the other thing is when I'm glad you mentioned that. So the way I described this to a couple people was like an anime that's just written in novel form instead of the traditional format. Because like the action scenes they're really intense and like stylized. The characters they're descended from basically this like demon hunting deity, so they're super powered compared to regular people. Where it might take like 4 or 5 soldiers to overcome like an oni, which is like an ogreish demon, like Jin and Shora can more or less solo them. So they're very powerful. So it has that aspect of like kind of anime like style to it. in novel form. And then I had a review from Andy Peliquin, who's an awesome self-pub author, like just a great guy, like super, like huge presence in the indie community, super supportive. And he said, if Demon Slayer was written in a Western style and decided to go full grimdark, he goes, the result will be mild and cheerful compared to Shadowbane. And I was like, yeah, that's going in an ad.
That's huge.
But then the fact that someone else made like the anime connection, I was like, okay, like I was on the right track here. Like I got what I was going for. And so that felt really good.
I love that. My first book that I wrote, I had the idea that it was like Avatar: The Last Airbender meets Naruto.
Nice.
Yeah.
So was that a fantasy novel then?
Yes.
Like,
yep.
Okay.
Yep. And the lead character, he's 13 and he's going into an academy, and so it's just literally, I thought if I could mash up all of my favorite worlds together and take all my favorite pieces and put them into a book, what would that look like? And that was that book that I ended up with.
Did you end up publishing that one?
I did. Yep.
So that was the very first book you wrote, you said?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I had a co-author write it with me. She has kind of life has taken over her world with kids and everything, so she has kind of fallen off the writing train. So that is the downside of writing with a co-author, is like you also are tied to them. So it is kind of stalled a little bit. So I don't market it as much as I should. But it was my heart at the time. I love that story so much.
Yeah, it's crazy how if you're just working on something constantly, you pour so much into it, and then like it's weird. Like you get like really close to your work.
Oh yeah.
It's and so that's been a cool experience for me.
So I have to ask, what is your favorite anime?
So I actually don't watch that much anime. That's the crazy part.
Really?
Yeah. So I loved One
I'm not
Punch.
an anime nerd at all.
I loved One Punch Man. Just because it kind of just pokes fun at conventions of the genre. And does it in just some really clever ways. And I don't know. I enjoyed like Saitama's whole like fitness routine, and he thinks that's why he's so powerful. And someone's like, that's basic fitness. So that just cracked me up. And then I recently Blue Eye Samurai blew me away.
Oh yeah,
that was incredible. And then so I haven't watched any like the powerhouse animes, like the really big ones, like Demon Slayer, Naruto. And then the last one, and this also drew some comps, is Berserk. That was a direct inspiration and influence. So I've read some of the manga, though I do have trouble with that format.
Oh yeah, you don't know where to go on the line, and
yeah, and it's just hard for me to digest. Like that artwork is so complex. It's almost like overwhelming at times. I retain information a lot better with like written word. But I did that, and I'm familiar with this. I'm familiar with the story. I read some of it, and then I watched the Netflix movie or adaptations of the Golden Age arc, and I was like, this is demented. Like this is awesome, and just seeing something that was so unapologetically like just dark and gruesome and visceral and was so popular, I was like, okay, like there are other people who like stuff like this. Like there is a market for this. Like if there's an audience of people who that resonates with, and so that was a big kind of like door opener for me conceptualizing Shadowbane.
if you like the dark stuff, you'll have to check out Invincible. It is it's essentially like superheroes who have a very bad streak.
That's the Prime original, right?
Yes.
I've heard really good things about that.
Yeah, it is very, very like, oh my gosh, I just watched a superhero like squeeze somebody's skull in and brains just went everywhere, and it is insane.
Sold.
Yeah, I figured. Yep. And the dad is like trying to teach his son how to do things, and then he uncovers that his dad's actually this very potentially dark character, and it's really good.
Yeah, so, that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it sounded like it. So we kind of jumped past the self-publishing thing, and then the small press. I really want to touch on that because that's huge for authors who are interested in going through potentially a small press versus indie, and kind of tell us how that went for you.
Yes. Yeah, and this was like a pivotal experience in my development as a writer and as an author. Yeah. I'd love to talk about this. So I finished finished Sundering, which is the title of my first book. And I put that in quotes because at the time I thought an editing pass was like doing some redundancy checks. I just was not, I just hadn't fully appreciated the concept of like actual like rewrites and revisions. So I queried it when it really wasn't ready. Got some, was stacking up rejections at an alarming rate. And then I entered a Twitter pitch contest, PitMad, and I got some interest from an editor with a small press. And so they asked for a submission. So I sent it in, and they gave me an offer. And I remember like it was a Friday afternoon, and we were at this. We just gotten off work. It's at this dive bar across the street that we went to with some work buddies. And I'm like sitting at the bar, and I get the email notification, and I open it up, and it's like congratulations with like extending an offer. And I like got my beer, and I just like slammed it down the table. I was like, I did it, and I had that like I was like, oh, like I won, I got it. And then looking back, it was just really naive. Like I was really excited, of course, but then I drank way too much and celebrated way too hard that night. And then I was like, okay, like I didn't sign that thing last night. That's good. Like let's take a minute and think. And there's this guy who works out at the gym who's an author. His name's Ross Richel, and his novel The Knife is incredible. It's a military thriller, not my genre, but it was so well written. So he's like, hey man, he's like, let me buy you lunch. He's like, let's go over the contract. Let me just walk you through it, and I'll break it down for you. And so he basically explains to me that there's no royalty or very low royalties and no advance. I'd even have to pay for my own author copies. He's like, they're not trying to screw you over. He's like, but this is the language of a publisher that's extremely conservative because they're unsure of how many copies they're going to sell. He's like, there's no guarantee they're going to market your work. He's like, and at this point, he's like, you're going to have to ask yourself, like, what is it that they're doing that you would be unable to do yourself if you take the time to learn these skills. And he just kind of like asked me questions like, what do you really want from this? Like, let's say this book sells 200 copies and you're getting like $1.50 royalty per copy. Like, you've been working on this book for 2 years. Like, are you happy with making $200 to $300 on 2 years of your work? Like, absolutely not. And and he could tell that I was like, but I want to be published, and he kind of called me out. He's like, look, man, he's like, I don't know you that well. He's like, but I think you're settling. He's like, I think you're just chasing the notion of being published over like what you actually want. He's like, it's not my place to tell you what to do. He's like, but he's like, if we were closer friends, I knew you better. He's like, I would urge you to act with some caution here and to like really think about what you want before taking like the easy way out, essentially. And he's like, look, he's like, if they're making you this offer, he's like, if you're getting offers from small presses but not big ones, he's like, it means your book is like just good enough. He's like, but it's not great. He's like, so you're just not there yet. He's like, do you still have agents you can query? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right, man, here's what you do. He's like, go back. He's like, make your work better. He's like, and then he's like, he said verbatim, he's like, get some sand in your crotch, go get pissed off. He's like, go make your work better. He's like, and then do whatever it takes to get one of those agents. And it lit such a fire under my ass. So I turned down the offer. I think I asked for an advance first, and then they declined. And so then I said it's just probably not a good fit. So we moved on. And it was definitely like the right decision. So I went back and basically rewrote that book, Sundering, from page one, made it like it came out way better. And then I was querying again. This time I was getting personalized responses like, this sounds promising, but X reason it didn't work for me. So it was still no full request, but it was being acknowledged. And then it was during COVID, and I saw that the editor from the small press that had extended me the offer was now a junior agent at a literary agency. And we had kept in touch a little bit over this, about like a year and a half or 2 years had gone by. We kept in touch. And then I was like, hey, you're agenting now. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. He asked me how Sundering was going. And I basically said that I rewrote it and got it, in a much better place. And he's like, send it my way. And it took him a long time to get back to me because he had a huge pile on his hands, manuscript, a lot of manuscripts on his hands. But eventually he called me, and we did an exclusive R&R. And so I did that. And then after that point, I got the offer.
That is awesome. You have done the thing that so many people are like, I wish I could find a literary agent, and then they just don't because they don't have, for one, you had the person who kind of, threw sand in your crotch, which I love that. But like they don't have that desire to go back and rewrite their thing when they realize it's not getting the traction that it should or the response that it should. And that's huge. Like, don't be too proud to think that you've written the next masterpiece where you can't go back and rewrite and like you said, look at the story and what is working, what's not working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still had to do substantial revisions after that. He was like, there's an entire POV. He's like, you got to cut this. He's like, it's unnecessary. He's like, these two characters are underdeveloped. He's like, we need more from them if they're going to be present. He's like, this part of the pacing is off. Like, this part of the characterization doesn't ring. Like, and that was why I liked working with him, because he really understood the story, and he really helped me cut to the core of it, and just like improve the parts that were already working and really bring up the parts that were not working. Like, he distilled it down to what it was, kind of like really meant to be. And it was really cool to work with someone who I felt like got my story. And it's just unfortunate. He ended up, getting an agent was a huge, like, again, I feel like I was like, I made it, like, smooth sailing from here. Nope.
Yeah.
So I started writing Shadowbane when Sundering went on submission. I got, another, neat little pile of rejections, but then Blackstone took it to their acquisitions meeting. For readers who might not be familiar with that, that basically means that the acquiring editor at the publishing house likes the story enough to pitch it for publishing to the other executives at the company. So that's, they might get 30 or 40 submissions in a month from agents, and then they pick one or two to take to a monthly or twice monthly acquisitions meeting. And then basically marketing shot it down. They said that they wanted an established author already, and they weren't going to take on any debuts in fantasy. Which sounds like a thing that you might want to tell the acquisitions editor, to be honest. Like, hey, like, we're not going to consider stuff from debuts. So I was a little salty about it at the time. But it's a business. They're doing what they think is going to help with their bottom line. Nothing personal. So I just took it on the chin and moved on. And then shortly after I finished writing Shadowbane, it was 200,000 words. So if you're picking up a trend here where I overwrite, and sent it to my agent, and didn't hear from him for about 3 months. And then he ended up calling me and saying he was leaving the industry, and he hadn't read it yet. And so that was a big blow. Agenting is tough, and he was just having a hard time, and he decided to switch career paths. So, I don't begrudge him that. It just left me in a sticky situation. He did connect me with the other fantasy agents at his agency, but they do much more like kind of like whimsical, like lighthearted adventure based stuff. That's kind of like their forte. And I was like, I am pretty sure they're not going to accept this like bloody, violent, like fast paced demon slashing adventure. So I didn't even approach them, and I knew I wasn't going to get a response with a 200,000 word manuscript from an agent I queried out of the cold. And that was around the time when indie fantasy started to make some noise. And I took 6 months. I wrote a really terrible screenplay just to write, but like not be on the project. And again, I was playing Elden Ring, and I was just thinking like, all right, what am I going to do with this book? Like, do I trim this down to a manageable length and try to query? Do I self-publish? Do I start saving money to invest in the costs associated with that? And eventually I just decided to bet on myself. And I think that was a huge part of it, just wanting full creative control and, autonomy. But also I realized that at 200,000 words, I didn't overwrite one book. I underwrote 2 books. And so I basically split that in half. And then the first half of that became what is Shadowbane. The second half is what, the sequel that I'm working on now. And then and then around a little bit later, I had a solid concept for a third, that, will end the trilogy. And so that was when I was like, okay, this is 2 books. Like, I'm doing this.
I have a question for you. So when you're writing, is your mind solely on this or do you have ideas floating in that you're like, oh, that would be that's like a completely separate idea, like that's a completely separate book or series or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I do that, I put them down in a separate file, and then I just move on. So anytime I think of something, like I said, I'll usually let it marinate for a little bit, and then if I find myself drawn back to that idea, then I'm like, okay, this goes in the master note file, or the project idea file, whatever I've titled it. I think at this point I have ideas for about 6 different projects, um, and at the rate I write, because I write pretty slow, that's going to be like 20 years of work. So like I
I
don't
feel
want
like
any.
you've got your life's work right there in that one file.
Yeah, I don't want any new ideas for a long time. Like I just want to execute on the stuff I have. But if I think of something that gets me excited, I'm not going to put it down. And so those, some of those theoretically, like I will literally have like a decade just to throw some ideas out there a little bit at a time. Um, like the project I will probably write after Shadowbane is something that I've probably had in my head for about 2 to 3 years. At this point, I have maybe like a page of notes on it. Um, so still some very preliminary stuff, but enough to where like I'm very solid on the concept. I'm kind of occasionally thinking about like the cast of supporting characters, and I know like one of two ways it's going to end. And I have like the setting for that and the general like tone or like aesthetic I want.
Yeah.
And so that's just stuff, that I just take time to think about, and
Right.
and then I put it down and move back to Shadowbane.
So it sounds like you're a plotter, then you kind of get a general idea. Do you go really in depth once you actually pick it up, or what does your writing process look like?
I've tried to categorize this for a long time, and like it's pure chaos, to be honest. Like I try to plot stuff out, and I almost always know how it's going to end, but I need to discovery write at times just to like really get to know the characters. Like the first time I was drafting Shadowbane, Jin and Shura were both pretty flat, and like every like editing pass, I just made them like more complex and added more dimensions because I had a better sense of like, okay, like what's their value system? Like why do they see the world this way? What would have caused them to see the world this way? Um, like what do they disagree on? Like how can that come to play in the plot and force them to make decisions that drive them apart? Stuff like that. And those elements were just not there at first. So I just had to kind of like write what happens and then go back and be like, okay, how do I write these characters in a way that makes what happens an organic thing that stems from their decisions? So even if I know where it's going, like I don't have all the connecting pieces fleshed out yet, because those are usually the products of like the character interactions themselves and the decisions they make.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the authors that can make it all tie together in such a beautiful way, like kind of going back to Brandon Sanderson's, like the opening scene in that book is so pivotal to the last scene in that book. And it's like that's 3 books. And just
Wow.
to understand how they do that, it's like, okay, so you wrote on this for years and developed this plot before you actually even started writing anything. That he had to have, like, otherwise I have no idea how you make stuff connect that beautifully.
Yeah. So there's a lot of vision there, and probably a lot of patience in executing that. It's like
Yeah.
that's good writing, right? That's why he's Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
His
do like vision boards or like kind of write out like do you write on like a vision board or a whiteboard or anything to kind of help, throw things
I'm
out into
I'm
different areas?
I'm just straight Google Docs. This office, there's a blank wall behind the computer. There's nothing on it. It's so I do. I mean, I probably about like 40 to 50 pages of notes on this trilogy, but it just all goes in a Google Doc, and parts of it are really neatly organized. Parts of it are just like scattershot. Like I'm like watching a movie at like midnight, and I'm like, oh, like this one weird little aspect of this movie could be a useful thing for so and so. Like, and then I'll just like throw that in at the end of the note file. I'm like, I'll find that later, and I'll put it where it needs to be. But it's
So
yeah, I
I
don't.
have a suggestion for you because I was a Google Docs girl too. That was everything I had, like, the government Google Docs, I had the characters Google Docs, I had everything. Check out Obsidian. It is literally you can like link documents or link stuff in your writing. So like the first time you mention a character, you can link that to the characters file. It creates this web where everything connects together and you can see this actual web, and it has completely changed my writing. Like the first book that I wrote was very, they had a character that they met and they just fell off. They didn't meet him again. Like it was, you know, that sort of thing. But now that I have it all there, like even the characters that come in and they seem like they might not be important, I can tie them back in because they are connected and I can see how it all connects. And it's just, I want to recommend it to every author. It's amazing.
I've never heard of that before. I've heard of like Scrivener and some other stuff, which I've just never tried. But that does it does sound useful. And sometimes like I'm like really like almost like lazy stubborn with stuff where I'm just like I just started plotting Google Docs because at the time I was like writing on my phone on the train and I didn't have a laptop because I was 25 and broke. So like it's just like a habit that's stuck. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, like maybe I should start expanding the toolkit a little bit.
Yeah, if it's working, why reinvent the wheel kind of thing.
Yeah, but then also like if it streamlines my process, like I think you have to work on stuff, right? You have to adjust your approach until it's really like a finely tuned like process. Like watching Brandon Sanderson, we're circling back here, outline his lectures where he's outlining how he makes plots and how he creates magic systems and his like character like his character sliders for the different like attributes. I was like, man, he has this down to a system, and that's why he's able to create these characters that feel so relatable and these worlds that feel so like textured and lived in. And he like that's his process, and like I've adopted a couple, like try to learn glean what I can from that. But you can just see he has it down pat, and I think we can do that not just for the writing itself, but for the practices that surround that. So one thing I'm doing differently drafting the sequel is with Shadowbane, I kept getting stuck on small research details, like what kind of wood is used in the construction of the temples or whatever, just so I didn't like name a species of tree that's like not in Japan, and stuff like that. So I'd get completely derailed on like research based stuff or not knowing like a small detail like that, or something I just wouldn't want to portray, or maybe a detail that I wasn't sure like how exactly I specified it. So I'm calling back to something from like 10 chapters earlier. And I'd have to go back and like sit and think about like, okay, like how am I going to phrase this in this way? And then I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that this time. Anything I have questions about that slows me down, I type whatever my gut instinct is, I bold it so it stands out in my next pass, and I move on. And I'm like, that's a thing that I like. It hurts my brain to do that, but I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this and see if it makes me more efficient in the long run.
Avoids the rabbit holes.
Yeah. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I have to try it, and and if it does work, then it's like cool. I've grown as a writer. I've become that much more efficient in how I'm creating this book.
Yeah, because going back to Brandon Sanderson, he was not starting off and having the system laid out, right? He did, like we said, he failed a million times, I'm sure, and that's how he developed his system. Is like, okay, like just like you said, I can't get stuck on the research. Let's go back and do it at a different time, and developing that system. And it looks different for everyone. Like the way that you operate, the way that I operate, the way that anyone operates, it's going to look different. And whenever you listen to other people who write and they give you these presentations and stuff, you take what works for you and then you leave what doesn't. You don't have to stress about it. And you don't have to worry like, oh, they're writing and they're publishing 10 books this year. And you're fine. And I'm only gonna publish one book. Like that's okay. That is a completely different person, and the way that they operate is completely different.
Yeah, and I think sometimes like most of the writers and people in the community I know, they're like really like friendly, like helpful people. They just want to help, and sometimes wanting to give like advice or perspective turns into like, you should do it this way because this is what works for me, and sometimes ends up being like dogmatic instead of, like you said, like realizing that people do have their approaches. And when you think about it, it's just the way that you like categorize and file information and ideas from your brain and like distill that into words on the page. So like there's no way that process is going to be identical for different people, even if there's good practices. Like yes, I outline, and it's probably because I write pretty like dense fantasy, so I have to keep track of a lot of small details. So like I believe people should outline, but it's like if someone's writing like like a cozy story that takes place in like modern day New York City, they might not need much of an outline besides like the basic like beats of the plot. Like there's no like world building, and there might not be a big cast of characters. And if that person's like, yeah, I just like freehand it and I just go, like that probably seems like a reasonable process for that type of story.
Yeah. Or like I even know people, like we have one of our co-hosts, she can bust out like almost 20,000 words a day when she sits down and writes. And I'm like, I can't, I'm even afraid to look at what I write and compare it to that, because then I'll be in the comparison game and I know it's not anywhere close to that. So it's also just about what your processor, like everyone, their processor just looks different.
Yeah. I made the mistake of asking, like doing a Twitter post, like, hey, how much, like, what's the most you've ever written in a day? And the word counts I was seeing were staggering. And I got like depressed for like a week after that, because like some people were doing like 10K in a day, and 10K is like a good week for me.
Yeah, same. Yep.
But I think that too, that have to keep in mind, like, one, what does your day job look like? Or, what does that, are these people full-time authors? Do they do nothing else? And that's all they do is they sit down and they just like type out a bunch of, type out a whole bunch of words. And then what is the quality of those words? I mean, do they have to go back and cut out 10,000 of them because it's just nonsensical stuff? You know what I'm saying? So I think also that, also people's personalities and the things that they do either in their day job or in their hobbies also I would think very much influence how you write, right? So like you come from a very regimented, a very, heavy lifting on your writing style. So it's not going to be, cute and fluffy and, it's going to be hardcore. We're going to get through this. We're going to push through this and, we're going to get through the scene and then break, because you got to rest. You got to let your muscles rest for a few minutes or whatever. So I don't know. That's just what it seems it would be logical.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's funny because my day-to-day is so regimented, because I usually work about 10 to 12 hours a day. And so I'm, I write like on the train on the way to work or something, or, on the train on the way back, on my lunch break, stuff like that. And, carve out time at home when I can. But it's like the writing is not regimented because the rest of my day is so rigid that the writing has to be flexible around that. So like I've had to learn to like, oh, I have like 15 minutes. Like, okay, like I don't have time to warm up. I'm just going to write, like, just go. And sometimes that results in some pretty solid a page or two. Sometimes that results in like 2 commas and half a sentence. And it's really frustrating.
You get stuck rereading the chapters before you, and then you're like, oh, my time's up.
Yeah. It is what it is. Like, and to what you're saying with like the people with really high productive word counts being full-time authors. And that's usually the case. Like after I had that initial, like, oh my God, like I'm not nearly as productive as these people. I kind of like, once I got a little bit of distance from that, I thought about it more, and I'm like, that makes more sense. Like we're just in different circumstances, and that's okay. So I've kind of accepted the fact that like I write slowly for now, and there, and the reason I was worried about it is because there's all this pressure to release rapidly for self-pub. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I think that advice applies towards books that are like in the, maybe like the 80K range, 90K word count, full-time authors. Like they've been doing this a while. Like that's when their system is polished and they know what they're doing. And I was like, I'm just not there yet. And the books I write are literally twice that length. It's like, so I'm just not, like, it's a different game, and I can't put myself on that scoreboard, so to speak.
No, and you wouldn't train somebody like that either. You don't want people to just jump into something and go full bore. Like, it's okay. I'm sure you tell your clients it's okay to start out small, get the basics, get the form right, you don't have to go to heavy weight. You got to start light, higher reps, lower weight, that kind of thing. So I mean, give yourself grace, the same grace that you give your clients in that world.
Yeah. It's some good advice, and you're spot on. Like I'll have a client who I've been working with for like 3 months, and they'll see me come off a session where I've just trained someone, and that person's doing something that looks really complex and difficult and kind of like fun to do. And they're like, when do I get to do that? I'm like, I've been working with that guy for 5 years. Like, let's slow things down a little bit. Like you're just in different spots.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. And also if you think about like J.R.R. Martin, how long are we waiting for that last book? I mean, there's a good chance he might, just, and we never get that last book. So just like you're saying, in the fantasy world, I think there is more of that grace. But, the readers who get upset that they're not able to just consume that next book right away, that's almost like a bonus. Like they want to dive into that next book, they want to consume it, they want to read it immediately because it was so good. And we like understanding their frustration is coming from a place of they enjoyed our work, and it's not necessarily like, oh, I need to rush to because everyone's upset that I don't have this out.
Yeah. It's funny. I've kind of like, I see both sides of the like authors have a responsibility, or like on one hand, I'm like, okay, like as a writer, you don't owe anyone like your art or your work or your time. Um, and especially not going to a place where it might be like negatively impacting your mental health or your day-to-day life. But on the other hand, I do see that like as a writer, like if you start a story, you're essentially making a promise to your reader about the end of that story. And so I think the reason the tide is like kind of turned against George R. R. Martin is because I think people probably feel like betrayed by him, that he kind of like left them hanging and just rode off into the sunset, laughing all the way to the bank. So I understand why people are frustrated. Even though I generally defend like let authors work at their own pace. I'm like, man, it's been like 12 years now. It's been a long time.
Well, if you think about like, so there's a lot of, TV series and things out there where it's like one season and they're done, even though it could continue on, or the author or the artist behind it had more in mind. That's kind of common. And I think that it's in the book world, kind of like you said, we do kind of put this expectation of like, we will tell you this whole story, but it's so common in the book world that there's not that expectation. Like there's a frustration, but it's not like, oh, I can't believe they're not going to come out with a new series and everything. When you think about it as an author, you have to be the producer, you have to be the all of the teams, everything is in on you. Whereas when you go into the movie world, there's a group of people. So if one of them falls off, it's like, oh, okay, this fell through because one person fell off. But like you said, if your mental health is being triggered by this, or if your life shifts, that is all people in your head who's working on this team. And so, yeah, it makes sense. Okay, it fell off. It's going to get canceled or whatever because you are one person doing 500 million jobs.
Yeah. Doing a book launch while drafting, that was like I think I did a good job with it. There's some things I wish I'd done a little differently, but that was a huge um, like shock for me at first. Was like, okay, I just wrote for 2 hours. Now I have to spend an hour looking up reviewer, like bloggers and reviewers, and emailing them about art copies and stuff like that, and like learning that new skill set while trying not to burn myself out on the actual aspect of like still writing. Yeah, it's a huge, it's a huge challenge. And like, I consider myself a pretty productive and disciplined person. But there are definitely times when I was like, I can't do any of this today. Like I'm gonna go sit on my balcony and like drink a beer and hang out with my dog. Like I just need a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's huge. That is actually part of like when you go to bed at nighttime and you're resting your body, that is essentially our creative rest.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm guilty of like staying up too late trying to write, and then I'm terrible the next day and I can't write anything worth a damn. And I'm like, you know what, like that hour of sleep that I sacrificed for this extra half page, because at that point my brain was fried and I was just grinding out slop. Like that was not worth it. And had I just
Yeah.
like slept an extra hour, I would have had maybe 2 to 3 decent pages today.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to get a better handle on like where that line is between like when to push and when not to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I imagine you can kind of compare it a little bit to listening to your body when you're working out. If a muscle feels tweaked or if your shoulder feels tweaked or whatever, maybe you do leg day or something. And it's the same thing as like if your mindset is exhausted and things are foggy, maybe go and consume something that will help your creative juices rather than produce something that exhausts them.
And what's funny is with writing, or sorry, with lifting, it's like a no brainer, right? Like I
But in
know,
the
like
beginning, it wasn't.
no, that was how I got hurt like 100 times. um, and then compared to like the competition I mentioned where I finally squatted 500 pounds, I had a quad strain for the entirety of that competition session, but like for like 12 weeks, and I was training through it because I knew the line and I went like right up to it and would retreat, and I was totally fine. Like it's the best I've ever managed like physical injury. Um, but for some reason, like I'm working on it, but I'm having trouble, and I've had trouble taking that approach with writing. Um, so it's something that it's like learning to apply a skill set in one area of my life to a different area, and it's just I'm starting to figure it out, but it's been a process.
Well, and I think too that you have to, as authors, as a writer, your process and all of that's going to grow as you grow older, and like as you grow in your literary chops, that is going to also change. And I would think that people who have been around for a long time, like for example, Jennifer Armentrout, she used to crank out so many books, but she's gotten older, she has an eye disease, and so she has to kind of step back a little bit and take a little bit more time and take care of her body, take care of her mind a little bit more. I mean, it's kind of the same in everything. It is lifting. The older I'm older, so I have to be more careful. I don't recover as quickly when I injure myself. So I would think that all of that would translate into still giving yourself more grace.
Yeah, one of my powerlifting client who's 67, he says about once a week, he goes, "Father Time is undefeated," and just so yeah, and I know my writing process now is going to look different so I'm 33 right now. It's going to look different when I'm 40, when I'm 50, when I'm 60. So we don't have kids yet, but it's on the table in the next couple of years, and I think part of me, like, why I feel a lot of pressure to get like at least this trilogy like out relatively soon. I'm not going to rush anything. I'm not going to put it out there before it's ready. But the reason I feel some pressure to really work on this is because I know at some point I'm going to have a house full of screaming children, and I imagine that's not great for concentration. So I'm like, I feel like I have this little window to to get my foot in the door and to make a little bit of a splash. And so I'm like, this is an opportunity. Like, I can't get complacent just because this opportunity is like maybe a 2 to 3 year window, because we tend to lose like perspective when there's like broader domains of time involved. I'm like, I have to treat these days and these months as like a precious thing, because it's not going to last forever.
Yeah. It does challenge things. I'll be honest. It is not the easiest having kids who are going crazy in the other room while you're writing a battle scene.
All right, so my wife's name is Taylor, and she like baby talks Rizzo like all the time, right? And it's super adorable. But sometimes I write with headphones in and music. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes the same thing. I'm trying to write like I was writing the scene like the character's like getting like tortured, and it's so brutal. And in the background, she's like, "Who's a sweet fluffy boy? Like, who's the fluffy puppy?" And I'm like, I was like, "Babe," I was like, I either need you to go into the other room or I need to bail. Like, this is like we are destroying the tension right now.
You go back and reread that, and you're like, "Why did he stroke his face like that? I don't."
Yeah. It's like, why did he call him a good boy? Like, oh god.
You might create a whole new kink there if you do that. You better be careful, Cal.
I'm trying to stay pretty heavily out of the romance space.
That's funny. So as you are kind of going forward with your endeavors and stuff, do you have this drive, or is there like a specific drive? I know you kind of have that mindset of like you've got a timeline with kids and things, but what drives you to continue this?
I just want to write. Like, I've always loved writing. Like, when I was 6 years old, like for like some like write a story for first grade thing or whatever, I basically pirated this plot line from Chrono Trigger and just wrote it really badly. But it's like, I just always liked doing it. I don't even know what it is about it. Just, I don't know. I think storytelling is really cool. Like, it's a way that we can explore stuff and like learn lessons that we might not be able to just through our everyday like mundane life. And I think that's why I particularly enjoy fantasy so much, because it has this ability to like thematically, like people are the same, right? Like what world that like or environment they're in, like human nature is human nature. And I think we can learn like and explore some really cool stuff about ourselves and about our world through like the lens of like some crazy world where there's like magic and dragons and like 12 moons and stuff. Like, that's awesome to me. And so I just like, I think I like having a hand in making that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is definitely a thing of like, if you want to tell stories, this is a great place for you to be.
Yeah. It's one of like, I forget who said it, but it's like, if you can do anything else besides write, you should do that instead. And I love the fitness industry. It's you know, it's definitely like a passion of mine, and I'm never going to stop working out. Like I'd like to have a few training clients, you know, like just intermittently. Like if I could work like train 2 or 3 people in a day and then write basically full time outside of that, that'd be like my dream setup. But like writing is definitely the thing that like I think I'm like here to do.
So I have something really funny to think about. So like when you get as big as like J.R.R. Tolkien and all them, you're gonna have little book nerds in there trying to train under you just because they're like, he wrote my favorite fantasy epic story, and they're in their like little tiny arms. They're like, train me, please.
That's where I was when I was 14. I'll be like, all right, like let's go, kid. Like
Yeah.
like you've read my book, so you're in for some shit now. Sorry, pardon the language.
You're good.
Please.
This is the most mildest cussing episode we've ever had, 100%. So you're good.
Oh, good. I've held back a few times. I did another interview before, and he's like, I try to keep it like kid friendly. So,
nah, you don't have to do that.
All right.
When we have reverse harem authors on here, we can't be kid friendly anymore.
that tracks. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm sure that one of the listeners is thinking that like this guy writes grimdark and he hasn't cursed yet. Like, well, like what's Jin is foul, like especially early on. He's just supposed to be this like rude, like he's supposed to be borderline unlikable at first, and he has a nasty temperament. He's just surly and just curses a bunch, and someone's gonna be like, oh, like this guy wrote that character, like that doesn't check out.
I love that. I love whenever the author is like a complete contrast to the characters that they write. That is just, it boggles my mind.
I actually do curse a lot in real life, but like I don't know, I slip it in and I smile when I do it, so it doesn't sound like I'm cursing. So it's like I'm sneaky with it. I get away with it.
We just curse all the time and we don't care.
Oh yeah. Yeah, fuck is my favorite word. I love.
Too.
Yep. So
it's a pretty diverse one.
So much in
it's just so passionate. Like it's a broad range of the way I can use it, and
yeah, it's a good instrument. You can it's diverse.
It really is.
Fuck is a good instrument. That's funny. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't say it like that.
Well, depending on what area you're going for.
So you also say that you don't lack motivation. Like that's not something you ever have a problem with.
Rarely. I'd like to pretend like in general, yeah, I'm pretty motivated. Like of course, like I just mentioned, there's like some days I just can't muster it and I have to take a little break. But I never really feel like I'm like sick of working on something. Even if like when I'm taking a break, it's like I kind of have to, even though I want to work on it, if that makes sense. Like the desire's there, just the energy's not, or the ability's not. But generally, like, I come in like, and I go into work and like, I generally like, I want to work out. And if I don't feel like it, I just make myself do it anyways, because it's habit. Same thing with writing. Like I generally want to write. I generally am looking forward to putting more words down on the page and seeing the story like form, before my eyes. And then, every once in a while I might not feel like it, but I generally try to do it anyways. Not perfect at it. Obviously I come up short sometimes, but in general, I'm pretty motivated day in, day out.
That's awesome. So Shadowbane it just came out on Tuesday, correct?
Yes.
So this episode will come out a little bit later. So Tuesday what was the date on that?
The 17th.
The 17th. Awesome. So that book is the first in a potential trilogy?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And you're working on the second book right now.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just about done drafting the sequel. I am going to play the Elden Ring downloadable content for like a month or two while I just like take my eyes off the project. Structurally, it's a mess. So I definitely have some cleaning up to do. So I want a little bit of distance from that, and then I can go back and be like, all right, how many of these chapters are going to get axed?
Do you have a copy of the book with you right now?
Yes, I do.
Can you show it so that our readers could see the cover and what it would look like if they want to go get it?
Yep. Yeah, it's on my shelf. Just give me one second.
Fine.
That was a good question.
Thanks. I tried. And I didn't walk over you either.
Finally. We'll figure this thing out.
There we go.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh, that looks so cool. My son would love that book.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Now, let me see how thick it is. I've got it.
So the hardback is 449 pages. And then
Nice.
there we go. And we got the blurb for you.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you. I'd like to take credit, but my cover artist was awesome, and he steered me away from my own worst impulses. So I'll elaborate on that in a second. But yeah, it's 449 pages. So it's probably about like 167,000 words, I think, was the final count. So it's decent size, but it's not an absolute chonker. Like and I've been told that like pacing wise, it reads pretty quickly and smoothly. So cover art, right? So I went on this website called 99 Designs, which I had some success with before for commissioning like some character art for like an earlier project, and for the first book I wrote. And my idea was, I generally like minimalist covers with like a really striking image. That's just like what appeals to me, and that's kind of what I went in with. And so near the at a certain point in the book, that they're fighting the antagonist. The antagonist is he's actually a real historical figure called Sutoku Tenno. And he's basically this emperor who was like forced from his throne and basically lived a life of like shame and disgrace. And he died so angry and bitter that his soul reincarnated into this really powerful demon. So they're fighting. So he's this demon god basically that they're fighting. And he leads, he's the figurehead of this cult that worships him as a deity. And so he's like the main antagonist. And there's a point where Shura and Jin they're investigating and tracking down this cult. They're trying to basically cut the head off the snake. And they find this gigantic totem of Sutoku Tenno, like a massive, like 4-story like statue. And he has wings. He's kind of like a gigantic like man eagle thing. And so the wings are spread, and as they get closer, they realize that the wings are made of human skin. And so I wanted like that statue as like the front cover. And then the artist, he's like, it's a cool image. He's like, but it might not work. He's like, because it might not clue readers into what the story is about. He's like, there are just certain genre conventions you wanna follow. And so I bounced a few more ideas off him, and he's asking me more questions about the story. And he goes, what if I just draw your characters killing a bunch of demons? And I was like, it's a tall order to draw like a huge battle scene. I was like, are you up for it? And he's like, I got you. He's like, I'll throw the statue in the background just so you can still get what you want. So if you notice, right, you do see that statue in the background of like, the full jacket spread.
That's so cool.
So he knocked it out of the park. And once I saw his initial like sketches, I was like, yeah, I'm in good hands. Like he knows what he's doing, and I just let him run with that. So this was a good case of like just me not being a control freak and just let the experts do what they do best. Like they know what they're doing. They're professionals for a reason.
Is he still in business? Is he still doing that?
Yes. So his name's Andre Bat, or Bat, Andrei, Bat, like baseball bat. He operates through 99 Designs. So if anyone's looking for a cover designer, give him a shot. Give his portfolio a look. Tell him Cal Logan sent you.
I may or may not be writing that down.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I found him through that website. I was just browsing through, and I saw his portfolio, and I was like, yeah, I'm contacting this guy right away.
Awesome.
That is awesome. So, do you kind of have an idea of when you're going to want the second book to come out, or are you just kind of working through the rewrites and see where that lands you?
I'm gunning through 2026, or for 2026. I think that's doable if I stay disciplined. But that being said, I'm not gonna rush it.
Yeah.
But
and that gives you a lot of time to build the hype of the book one, and get the audio book out, like Kathy was saying. So
yeah, definitely. I think like early to mid 2026 would be like ideal, but if it's fall or if it has to be early 2027, it is what it is. Like I said, I'm as much as I've talked about this being like a business, on the back end, I'm not going to like rush to deadline or anything. Like I still think the art comes first. The story comes first. So it'll take as long as it takes. It'll be ready when it's ready. But knowing myself and the pace I work at, I think 2026 is a reasonable target.
I love that. Now, do you have any advice from your experience and what you've been going through for anyone who is either facing challenges in their writing journey or looking to possibly start writing for the first time?
If you're looking to start writing for the first time, just be ruthless with how much you try to improve at the craft. Like if the writing is not there, then nothing else you do is going to matter. So you like the storytelling and the actual like the prose itself, like those have to be present. You have to practice that. Like Sundering, looking back, it just wasn't good enough. Like that other writer told me, and that's why I was getting rejections across the board. You know, it wasn't some misunderstood work of brilliance. It just wasn't. It wasn't ready. So, because I spent probably like 2 years, just while still writing, just devouring every resource on storytelling and like sentence construction and stuff that I possibly could. And then I still have to practice it, right? It's not just enough to like read an article and then be like, oh, like, all right, I'm good at it now. You still have to put it into practice. So just be patient with yourself while you're doing that, because it's going to take time, but you have to put the legwork into actually trying to improve like the way you write from a sentence level to a chapter level to a story level. Because there are mechanisms like that make that stuff work. Like there is a science behind it. And then as far as like once you start doing that, then you just have to be really patient, really persistent. Like I joke about myself being like stupidly stubborn. And I think that's like half the reason that I've gotten one book done, because I just for better or worse, I generally don't take no for an answer, and I don't let stuff stop me. In this case, it's been positive. Sometimes that means in real life I blunder headfirst into some really stupid shit. But but as far as writing, like I got a lot of rejections, and it was like water off a duck's back. Like even if I got down at times, I was like, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna make this better. I'm gonna try again. Like my agent didn't read the second book I wrote and then left the industry. And it was on St. Patrick's Day, so I was drunk when I got that call. So that it was pretty disheartening. But it's like I can't let that stop me. So you're going to get kicked when you're down, and you just have to keep going no matter what. Like you just have to have this like unreasonable belief in yourself. We got time we have time for a quick little insert there. I think So around the time before I started querying agents, I applied to a couple publishers that allowed unagented submissions, like Baen and Tor, and there's maybe one more. And I didn't hear anything back from any of them. I got like one rejection like 9 months after the fact, and I was like, yeah, I figured by this point. And then I had recently moved out of my parents' house after college. I lived at home for like a year and then moved out. And my mom sends me this picture, and she's like, of a letter, and she's like, hey, is this important? We found this, like this got lost at the bottom of the mail pile, and it was from Tor and it was a full request, but it was a year later. But it was dated like 8 months before that. And I was like, that is a request for my book, Mom. Like, is it like, really wish you hadn't lost this. And so of course I went, I got back in contact with Tor, and I sounded insane, and they didn't respond.
Yeah.
And so it just straight up bad luck, and it cost me what was a potential opportunity. Really upset about that one. I was like, okay, well, can't put toothpaste back in the tube. Like, and that's when I was already querying agents at that time. But just another like, yeah, you just get your ass kicked sometimes. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if you believe in like, destiny or like, things that sort of nature, but like when you have a flat tire and you can't go out to work or whatever that day or go to that thing, and then you avoid the wreck that happened on the road, you're like, there's something at play there that was meant to not happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think for as much like mental like anguish at times that the process of the past 8 years has been, like I couldn't be happier with where I'm at. I feel like it's one book, so like I'm trying not to like get like too much in my head, but like I feel like I earned my stripes. Like this happened for a reason. I'm really happy with the book I wrote, and the steps I took. In a weird way, like I can't imagine having it done another way, because I think a lot of those, like, they're kind of coming full circle here, but a lot of those failures and a lot of those times I came up short or just was the victim of bad luck, or just made a foolish decision. That stuff all like kind of gave me the level-headedness and the clarity to finally, like when it really mattered, like finish a good book and do and make mostly good decisions, surrounding its publication and release. Still made one or two boneheaded decisions, but it's like Shadowbane is not on Kindle Unlimited right now because I went through Draft to Digital because I was like, oh, like that's how it gets into libraries and bookstores, and then it's like, yeah, that's not how indies do it. Like that's for traditional publishers. Unless you have a big name, it's never gonna be found on there. Like, go Kindle Unlimited. It's the way you reach more readers, and someone laid that out for me like very clearly recently, and so I'm trying to delist it now and put it on Kindle Unlimited. But I was like, that's something that I completely fumbled that,
That comes with experience.
Nope. Yeah, I'm not gonna make that mistake again. It's like same thing. Like, it just makes you better the second time around.
And you knowing that now, especially with you telling your story and being out there now, potentially someone listening to this knows that exact thing.
Yeah. Don't do what I did, kids. Put your stuff on Kindle Unlimited.
Be where the cool kids are.
Yeah.
The other advantage to being on KU is that when you have your audiobook, if they've purchased your book, or can get you on Kindle Unlimited, they can then get the audiobook for a discounted amount. So it's a great way to get both copies.
Crossover.
I am really glad that you're co-hosting this, because I'm learning some pretty valuable stuff around something that I had an interest in, but just have not gotten to the point of like digging into the research yet. So this is good things do happen to bad people.
Meant to be.
I'm sure if you have any other questions, Kathy's inbox is open too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
anytime.
That would be amazing. I will definitely I'll definitely take you up on that at some point in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
So if our listeners want to follow you or want to purchase Shadowbane, kind of tell us where to go.
So I imagine we're gonna have my social links, so I can have that stuff written out. Okay, so I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm definitely on Twitter the most. If you want to see pictures of Rizzo, that's probably your best bet. My website is callogan.com. Right there, you have purchase links for that will redirect you towards Amazon. You can also purchase the jacketed hardcover through Ingram Spark directly. It's the only way to purchase the jacketed hardcover, because Amazon's hardcovers are case laminate. But it is available on Amazon in paperback and ebook as well. And I think that's where you find me. I think that's where you find Shadowbane.
Awesome. Well, it was amazing talking to you, Cal. Like I said, I am so excited because you're our first fantasy author, and that's my genre. So finally I get to talk about something I love. I mean, I love all of the genres, but this one is just where my heart is.
Well, happy to be the first fantasy author on here. I did not know that going into this, so a little bit of pressure, but no, it was fun.
It was fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me, both of you. This was awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you did great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate that.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of L3. I can't wait to see you guys on the next one.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Hey, guys. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemon's Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey, and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.